And if we operate the existing supply chain system to max out production, we do not have enough to replace that system for over 2 years. The Stingers are even worse. We've already given the Ukrainians a third of our Stinger stockpile. We don't even have a manufacturing supply chain for those anymore because our army doesn't use it because we have an actual air force. We provide Stingers to third countries that are fighting a different sort of conflict from the kind that we design. Just establishing a new supply chain for a weapon that's basically been decommissioned from the US Army's point of view, that's going to take a year just to get going. So we are looking at the primary weapon systems that we are providing, that the cupboard is going to be bare sometime before the end of the summer, maybe into the fall. And if the Ukrainians have not managed to break the Russian military in that time frame, then this war of attrition, the Russians have more guns, they have more tanks, they have more people, and they will roll over Ukraine. So at some point in probably, let's call it September, October, the math of this war is going to change dramatically. Either the US is going to have to up its game in terms of involvement and risk that direct conflict, or it turns into a partisan war where the Ukrainians have fallen and they're fighting from behind enemy lines now, trying to savage the Russian deployments from within. Either way, the level of risk goes up substantially. The Chinese now know that everything that they thought was true about international conflicts has been proven wrong, whether it's sanctions or boycotts or how the other side fights. And unlike Ukraine, which has a very long land border with the Russian space, Taiwan's a moat. So the scale of casualties the Chinese would suffer would be at least a factor of 5 more than what the Russians have suffered just to get to the island. The Chinese now know that they couldn't capture Taiwan quickly. They couldn't impose a done deal on the rest of the world. They would be subject to sanctions and boycotts, and every step of that process would deindustrialize the Chinese system. So they have to come up with another plan, and it's not clear that they can. And strange of strange, the Chinese are actually boycotting the Russians more in many sectors, like energy, than the Europeans are. They don't want to get fought. The state companies in China do not want to fall to American sanctions or boycotts. They are too integrated and too dependent. And so we've actually seen a drawdown in the number of Chinese contracts with the Russians since the war started. Oh, sure, that's easy. Shale Revolution has proved to be far more economically viable than I ever thought. When the first book came out, I got a lot of crap for being overly exuberant about the cost of production in the shale fields and how much production could expand. I was generally on the far extreme in terms of optimism of that. And the prices have come down faster and expanded faster and been more stable than anything that even I would have predicted. We now have large portions of the Marcellus and the Permian Basin that are cost competitive with the Saudis. And we're seeing production schemes. The wells may draw down very quickly. Most of their output comes in the first year, but the capacity of the shale sector to get more and more oil out of each individual well has expanded massively. It used to be that a good shale well was 100 barrels a day. Now we're regularly topping 2,000 and 3,000. So everything that people say about shale in terms of cost structures being questionable and different from conventional is true, but it hasn't mattered because the technology has advanced so quickly. And that makes the United States' oil patch the only industry in the energy sector globally that can expand output in a reasonable amount of time. They're probably going to add 1 million to 1.5 million barrels of fresh production this year. It's not enough to make up for what's fallen off the Russian system, but it's a good start. It seems like an easy fix, doesn't it? The Europeans have a significant amount of spare nuclear capacity, things that have been mothballed in Germany, for example. I think the person to watch is the German foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock. She is one of the co-leaders of the Green Party. And her party, from its very foundation during the Cold War, has been anti-nuclear everything, to the point that the Greens have even supported lignite coal mining over nuclear power. Now, Ms. Baerbock, her first foreign trip after becoming foreign minister in the first of the year was to Russia to interface with the Russian foreign minister specifically on the issue of Ukraine. And before she could say anything, Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, insulted her country, her party, her person, and her gender in the most personal ways that he could, just saying that there's no reason you should be here. You're incompetent. You represent a horrible party in a broken country. And really, I just need to talk to the Americans because that's where you get your marching orders from anyway. The Green Party in Germany has long been pro-Russian. The Russian natural gas helps them get away from nuclear power. So she went back home humiliated and angry, and has been the driving force of German foreign policy as regards the Ukraine war ever since. She has built up in a very short period of time a huge amount of gravitas and earned respect from multiple aspects of the German political spectrum. And so when she decides that we have to go back to nukes, it's going to happen because she now has the political strength to make that decision. So right now, the Germans are trying to figure out how to get by without Russian coal, without Russian oil, without Russian natural gas. And the very short answer is they can't do it this year unless they turn the nukes back on. And Ms. Baerbock is the one who's going to be able to make that decision. She doesn't want to. This has been the core issue for German Greens going back to the beginning, but she is in the right position at the right time to make that decision. And so what we're going to have is later this year, there's going to be interruptions to the oil and natural gas flows from any number of reasons. It's either going to be cut off because of insurance, cut off because of the permafrost, or cut off because the Ukrainians blow up the lines. One or the other, this stuff is all going away. And the Germans will have a choice between no electricity or nuclear-powered electricity. And they're not stupid. But one of the very first things that the Soviet propaganda machine did back in the 1960s is make Americans, make Westerners, Europeans distrustful of nuclear power because it increased Russian control of the energy space. And it worked very well for them. It's still working very well for them. But I think we're going to have a break in that later this year, at least in Germany. It's, again, one person, Elvira Nabiullina. She is the central bank chief. I honestly think she, if not the smartest person on the planet right now, she's certainly the smartest central banker. She tried to quit when the war started, and Putin made it very clear that he did not recognize her resignation. He immediately posted her to another 5-year term. Nabiullina is the person who has had to struggle with an increasingly economically dysfunctional and increasingly nationalist Russia over the last 5 years. And the fact that there has not been a broad-scale economic collapse in Russia is largely at her feet with her policies. Specifically, what's going on now, Ms. Nabiullina has forced every Russian company that exports to put 80% of their currency earnings into the central bank to be converted into rubles, and that full transfer is used to stabilize the ruble. And that is why the ruble, after the initial fall, she put in this policy into place, and it's risen back to pre-war levels and actually a little bit higher. That's because the Russians are spending almost all of their foreign currency to support the ruble. And that works. That keeps inflation under control. It makes the pain of the sanctions a little bit less, but it also means that Russian companies have no spare foreign currency that they need to maintain their operations or expand. So it's kind of a starvation diet in the long run, but for now, it's working. If we remove the United States, I'll give you two, France and Argentina. First, France. France thinks of the European Union as a political project, not an economic one. It's kind of their equivalent of what the US has done with the global order. They maintain a degree of stability. They use it to make a platform that France can project power from, which means if the EU suffers a breakdown, the French never really integrated their economy with it the way that the Dutch or the Germans or the Poles have. And so they won't suffer as much when it falls. But they also have the military, economic, and demographic capacity to dominate most of the countries that they border. Now, there's any number of ways that can go wrong, but the point is that that conflict, that race, that contest is France's to lose. They have all the things in place that most of their border countries don't have. They have food security, they have energy security, they have a projection-based military. They can play in a lot of ponds and do very well. Argentina, second best geography in the world to the United States. Self-sufficient in most of their energy needs, definitely all of their food needs, and they have a very educated population. Now, their domestic economic management has been disastrous for pretty much the last century.
না জায়গা তো খুব সুন্দরই আছে আবু দেখছে আবু এখন খুব দৌড়ের উপর আছে হ্যাঁ কালকে মনে হয় বাইতে গেছিল মানে পরশুদিন বাইতে গেছিল কালকে বাইতে থেকে আইছে মাদ্রাসা হ্যাঁ এরা হুন বই